Rise up and build. Who knew there was this much to learn in the book of Nehemiah? This week, totally Micah's idea for the sermon title. Flip it. And it's like a reverse, like a mirroring. Like flip the opposition on its head. And let's talk about how. What'd you hear? What'd you learn that I didn't already say? Like what stood out to you? You listened to it 4 times. And again, if you want to comment or question or something that you would like for us to hone in on, then please do so. Specifically live on Facebook. YouTube is uploaded later. But
I like the fact that you recognized who your opposition is, and you broke that down. For me, it's identifying. Okay, yes, you will face opposition, but identify who they are. The naysayers, the ones who are critical, the distractors. Because when you're able to identify those people that may or may not be in your life, when it comes up or when it happens, when you're distracted, man, if you identify that ahead of time, then you have the opportunity to address it when it comes up, when it happens, so that way it doesn't catch you off guard. I love the fact that we laid out a way that you could identify who they are and how to deal with them.
Well, yeah, and I, along the same lines, I say this all the time. I like the practical stuff. Okay, that's great. Now, how do I do something about it? And we've said this before, but knowing the battle you're facing, knowing the opposition, knowing what the job is ahead. Okay, we're talking about rise up and build, rebuild, take the ruins, build something new. Okay, what are we building? What was built here before? What are we fixing? What are we renovating? I mean, if you go to do a job on a house and you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what tools to bring, you don't know what steps to take, what needs to come first. Yeah. So that self-identifying, and you talked about it last week, examining the wall and looking at, okay, taking the time to, and then once you identify those things, okay, now like, you know what to do. Now take the step. Now do the thing. Now flip it.
Yep. Flip the script.
Yeah, what is the opposite of the opposition? That was, I didn't want to get hung up on that too long, but when I'm being opposed, we talked about this a little bit today in a staff meeting. And first of all, what we tend to do is we give all this information, and it was good information. We gleaned a lot from it. We learned a lot from it. But like, okay, now that's over, and now I want some more new information. And so we seek information overload. I think instead of, without coming with some fancy way to say this, instead of just digging into the information that we already have and then staying there for a minute and really learning something, instead of just, oh, gimme. It's like we live in a day and age where we've become education and information hoarders. Like, we don't really appreciate it. Like, it's like a big meal. Okay, that was good. I don't really want that again today. I had that last night. Oh, I said that last week. Then we're always trying to keep up with the next new thing, which is cool. I love adapting, and I love staying ahead of the curve. Those are important. But sometimes just honing in and really learning something. So what am I learning from my ridicule? Like the people that come and they antagonize me, and they don't like me. It doesn't matter what I did. They're not going to like it. What can I learn from that?
Yeah, we said this morning, resistors, naysayers, distractors can be our best critiques. And if we just take the time to listen and hear what they're actually saying, instead of brushing it off, then we can learn something from it. That wasn't necessarily the case in Nehemiah's situation.
No.
But if you're hearing the same thing from multiple people, don't just assume it's negative and they're all wrong. Which it may be negative, and they may not be saying it in the kindest way, but we can always take something from somebody if we just take the time to listen.
I found it interesting that the tactics of the enemy are the same, right? He's always going to try to get you to question your worth, your value. I think it's funny how Sanballat came in and he started identifying in them like, oh, like that's not going to happen. Those are heaps of rubbish. In fact, not only are they heaps of rubbish, but they're burned. Like, you can't use that.
What are you even gonna accomplish right now?
Just pointing out the obvious.
You're gonna clean all this up? Look at all that you have to do.
Right.
So he's trying to overwhelm you with the objective.
Absolutely. So I think it's wisdom going into a season that you may be in and already knowing, one, who you are and whose you are. That helps by identifying your value, your worth, because the enemy's plans of attack are not going to change. He's going to try to get you to question who you are. But I love that at the end of that passage of chapter 4 towards verse 6, he says, so we built the wall.
Yeah.
Despite what we were going through, despite our season, we built the wall, and the people had a mind to work.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're stupid, so we built the wall.
We were going to do it anyway.
And one step at a time,
My
one
wife's
piece at
gonna
a
be
time.
mad
Yeah.
at me.
One piece at a time. And we talked. You mentioned the information overload. Sometimes when we examine our life and we see the big picture, we want to start playing whack-a-mole a little bit and doing all the things at one time instead of, hey, sitting down and digging in and figuring out, okay, God, let's work on this right now. I know I can see I've got all this other stuff too, but God, I'm gonna let you work on this right now, and then we'll move on. Instead of, I feel a lot of times we look at our life and we can get overwhelmed, and so we just give up. And we just stop and like, well, I'll never be able to do this for 30 years. Right. You really think I can serve God for 30 years amidst all of this and everything that's going on? But it's like one day at a time.
How am I ever going to turn this ship?
Yep.
Yeah. How are we ever going to build this building? How are we ever going to get all this done? And we go back to the acronym, and honestly, God gave me an acronym. I don't say that often, but God gave me an acronym. How do we do it? TOP. We're going to do this together. Mm-hmm. That's how we're. My daughter wants to know that she's not alone in whatever she's got to get done. Mm-hmm. Hey, it's okay. Yeah. We're going to do this together. That's how we're going to get this done. Number one. And it says that in verse 6. Mm-hmm. The people had a mind to work. Right. Nehemiah. So we built the wall. It's together. The second thing was, hey, one brick at a time, one section at a time, one group at a time, one person at a time. Right. You know, small group perspective. We have lost the value in one-on-one discipleship. Mm-hmm. Just sitting with someone at coffee and discussing our faith, discussing a sermon, discussing what we're learning in Scripture right now. We've lost that one-on-one and really finding value. We think if it's not big, it's not valuable. Yeah. If it's not as good as, well, if I can't do it as good as them, well, then I just don't do it at all. What if you just pick one at a time and we really begin to find value in those small things again? And then finally, prioritizing that. I'll quote Choco de Jesus on this for the rest of my life. What needs to be done first? Hey, take 10 minutes and make a list. Or 2 minutes. Take 2 minutes and make a list. What needs to be finished? What can I do today? There is actually a lot of comfort in getting something done. Like it's no longer hanging over your head. You feel better about it. What can I accomplish? What can I check off of this list to relieve some of this pressure? And most of the time, structure is what alleviates stress. Most people experience stress, and I know this is an exaggeration or a generalization, but often I've found that the things that were stressing me out were because of a lack of structure in that area. So when I stopped and I evaluated and I came up with some sort of structure, I began to alleviate that stress. And we began to actually finish some of those tasks.
Yeah, something Mr. Jimmy Butler shared with the worship team yesterday in his little devotion with them was there was a research done on worship and how it affects believers together. And they discovered that when people are in a room together listening to music, singing along to music, their heartbeats actually sync up. their physical bodies sync together, and God designed us that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why is it important? You say together, and you talked about unity yesterday. Why is it important to gather with one another? Why is it important? Why do we harp on worship all the time and what you're listening to and what you're putting in? Because you're either syncing yourself with what's coming out of your radio, that you're just allowing anything, or you're syncing yourself to actual praise and worship of God. And so when he shared that yesterday, I had never heard that before. That blew my mind. I was like, so you telling me like on 9:30 service when there's like 300 people in here, we're like, we all have the same heartbeat, and like we're all, that's why you feel like, that's why worship does something inside of you can't explain. And God designed us that way. So if we're going to do it together, we've got to get some of those foundational things right together.
Talking about syncing up and making it better. Like we're better together. I love verse 10 of chapter 4 in Nehemiah. By ourselves, we are not able to rebuild the wall. We can't do it by ourselves. Kind of like my finances whenever I was single. Like I wasn't going to straighten that out. But it wasn't.
And it didn't matter how much I made fun of you. You weren't going to fix it.
I wasn't going to fix it. It wasn't until I got married, and I'm going to brag on my bride. It wasn't until she helped me with some of the, hey, no, you can't spend money you don't have. You thinking a lot.
I was just going back to all the stuff that you would buy. How funny it was.
Let's not talk about that. No, but it puts things in perspective. Is that when you are linked with someone who has the same mind as you, who's going down the same path as you, and same thing with what you just said with those who are in worship together. Man, that physically that syncs up. Man, when you get together, whenever I got in holy matrimony with my bride, there was something to be said about not only just our finances syncing up, but the spiritual journey in which we were headed. Like we had the same goal, and that's what we were trying to do. And so critical, I think of this, a critique or a person who is critical can either help you or hurt you, depending on what you're willing to accept and what you're, now I'm not talking about someone who's literally out there to hurt you or harm you, like Nehemiah had with different people like Tobiah, but the people that are really trying to make you better.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It was, we need to take the time to identify who the real enemy is.
Right, exactly.
Versus people who just have an opinion that oppose ours. They're not trying to hurt us. They just don't agree with us.
Sure.
And that is what Nehemiah was facing in the second part of this passage. It wasn't the ridicule and the enemy in Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. Those guys, they were opposing the project.
Yeah.
Okay, the next set, the critical, what we called critical Christians, or the doubting disciples, which is just always, they're not trying to be that way.
Yeah.
Like they're not trying to hurt you. They're not trying to personally attack you, but it feels that way.
Right.
And you have to make sure that you don't let that, that you separate that, and you don't let that overwhelm you. You just understand that's part of the process.
Right.
I'm going to deal with some constructive criticism, and I'm going to deal with some just disagreeable criticism. I don't even know another word to say. Destructive criticism. That's very good. Yeah, some destructive criticism. But the way that we overcome that, the way that you overcome people criticizing your friendships, the way that you overcome people criticizing your relationship with Jesus, the way that you overcome people criticizing your marriage, right, is by coming together. And when those outside voices, even if they're not like directly demonic voices, maybe they're just people that doubt, but when those outside voices do not align with what you are internally convicted of, then you need to set those voices aside or put them in the proper place, or stop allowing those voices to speak into your life. I mean, it doesn't mean like pointing people, tell them shut up and don't talk to me, but don't give them a voice. Just because they speak doesn't mean that you have to give them a voice. Let it marinate, let it sit on you.
Something you said a couple weeks ago in one of our midweek Bible studies, remember the one who sent you. And when you know that God's the one that gave you the assignment, that God's the one that's leading you, to make the changes in your life that you're making, for the new friendships, the new relationships, to serve him, to be a part, to say no to some things, then you can stay confident in not having to find your validation in what other people are saying. So when people disagree with you or aren't excited about what you're excited about, or not happy for you like you thought they should be or would be, yeah, maybe it still stinks. It still stings a little bit, but it's not. We're not finding our validation in that, because our validation is in the one who gave us the assignment, who sent us, who's the one that gave us the mission.
So we've said this as a staff. We can disagree, but we will not be disunified. And I love that the opposite of a mutiny, the resolve of a mutiny is unity.
And just type that.
The coming together, yeah. So it's one thing to be like, to have a disagreement, over something, but then at the end of the day, like, we're still aligned, we're still in unity. I love, on number 3, the distractors. I love the fact that we still had to point out that the wall was finished, despite the opposition, despite everything that was trying to come against this project. The wall was still finished, and not just finished, but in 52 days it was finished.
And there was no breach.
Nothing. Like, so even though we hear it, even though we can feel it, even though we can sense it, like, man, this is tough, we're going to get through it, to see the final completion come to its head, it's satisfying to know that we know, and we sang about it yesterday, we know who holds the victory, who gets we know the end of the story. So that to me is satisfying to know.
Yeah.
Present. I'm sticking with the unity thing for a second. Megan and I made an agreement a long time ago, in 2 areas. One, she comes to our staff meetings most Monday mornings, especially with the school startup and all those things that are going on and coming up, and everything else that is happening within the next month. Our calendar looks like somebody splattered paint all over it, which is cool, right? We're alive. We're supposed to be productive. My son's all over the place too. You know what it means? It means he has energy and he's accomplishing things. So he's busy and he's active. We decided that we would be, even if we don't agree, we would always align in front of you. We would not disagree with one another. Now, we're not perfect. They've seen us not be perfect in this area. Our children have seen us. But in front of our children, in front of our staff, we're on the same team. Okay? That goes for any organization. That goes for any team. It goes for any group of people in an office. Like, we have to agree. It goes for the church. Like, we don't have to agree with one another, but we have to present a unified front. It doesn't have to be a uniform front. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be united. And so our children don't get to see us agree with them over one another. Our staff do not get to see us agree with them over one another. Your coworkers shouldn't get to see you agree with them over your boss. That's disloyalty. It's presenting a united front. To be honorable is to always present a united front, even when you do not, especially when you do not agree. Yeah. So you go into the distractors and you're not distracted by the distractors, because you're not divided with the people that you're supposed to be in line with. Yeah. And you all understand, this is our job, this is what we're supposed to do. So when Nehemiah asked a messenger to go and tell them, I'm busy, the messenger's ready to roll. He doesn't go up there and go, Nehemiah's down there watching everybody work. No, because they're united. They're accomplishing this thing together, one at a time, and it's prioritized, and they get it. So he's able to send somebody to speak for him, because that person has his DNA.
Yeah. And when talking about flip it, I just all of the memories coming up on Facebook right now are of when COVID first happened, and we're sitting in the conference room and trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this? What's next? And everybody in that situation, the whole world, you had one of 2 choices. You could either just give up and be resigned to the way that it was or what it had to be. Or you could say, okay, how do we change? How do we adapt? How do we do new and next? Because we could have either sat here and said, okay, well, we got to close the doors. It is what it is. It's a worldwide pandemic. I guess we're up a creek without a paddle and just hope everybody can hang on till we can meet back like we want to. Or we can do what we did and have meetings and say, okay, how do we adapt to this new environment? How do we build an ark for the flood?
How do we flip this?
Exactly. And
what's an ark, God?
Yeah, right.
What's a flood? What's rain?
and figuring that out. And so now we haven't stopped, but we've been rolling ever since that point. And now our online presence is increased, and we're reaching people that we didn't before. All because we sought God and was like, okay, how do you want to do this? Like, what's the next step? Where do we go from here? What have you given us to be able to do in flipping this situation around?
Think of how you want to wrap it up. What I love about what he's saying right now is I can think back. Right now, all the beginning of the closures is beginning to pop up. And like how we went from, I was just preaching to an empty room full of chairs, to we began to move those chairs out, till we had some people on the stage, till we dropped down to just lights in front of. And you can look at how we have progressed from that. And it wasn't overwhelming. It would have been if we would have gone, oh, we have to do that immediately. But the way that we learned was through a process and just refusing to be distracted. You can flip it and begin to move forward just one step at a time. Keep learning, keep growing, keep innovating, keep making adjustments. When something works, stick with it, but even try to find ways to make even that better. Wrapping it up.
My final thought would be, don't come back to the table that's already been flipped. Jesus didn't try to repurpose the table when he came in. I love your illustration where you're like, can y'all stop doing this? Like, no, he came and flipped that junk. So, like, don't try to, coming back to what we're talking about with COVID and restructuring and things like that, like, we don't want to go back to normal. We want to adjust that and totally flip it around and do not new normal, but something new, something fresh as we move forward. Jesus didn't try to repurpose what they were doing. He flipped it and he changed the narrative.
It's going to be a little bit of a tangent, but talking about having opposition and all that stuff, you got to have the right people in your corner. You got to be connected to people who, when you begin to flip it, when you begin to make the change, the reason I thought about that is because it's second service. Garrett DeVille could see exactly where you were going, and he's next to me, and he's like, oh yeah. And then when you flipped, he's like, and he was just excited that you flipped the table, and he was hoping that you did it really violently, I'm sure, and you did, and so he was excited, and that made me think, man, you got to have people in your corner that when you begin to do that, when you flip it, they're excited for you, they're in, they want to help, they want to be there, and so just a little interaction there on the second row got me thinking.
Flip it. When the enemy tries to rise up against you, just flip it. Flip it on him. When it comes into your head, hey, simple way that you can flip the things that you think about is to replace what you're thinking about with what God has already said. So, simple way, very practical, write down declarations. Write down a declaration in the area of your finances. This was in our Win the War of Your Mind thing. Write down a declaration. I have a declaration written of how I feel because I stress about finances too. Our children have a declaration that they repeat every day. I have a declaration of the kind of man of integrity that I want to be. I've written a letter to myself reminding me of who I want to be, who I want my children to see me as, and what it would cost me to have a lapse of integrity. Writing those declarations and speaking those things, reading those things, going to that, and making sure that those declarations are declaring God's word. It's not self-help junk. It's finding practical ways to get scripture into the patterns of your brain in the place of all the opposition that arises incessantly. All right, hey, speaking of the study for this week,
it's called Make Room. We posted it this morning. It's about opening up our life. He talks about going to fasting a little bit and figuring out, okay, God, what do you want to do through me? How do you want to? He says he'll work through us more immeasurably more than we could ever imagine. Okay, but we have to give him the room to do that. And so just opening up and saying, God, how do you want to flip this? How do you want to make this? How do you want to build this wall?
Have it your way, Lord. Hey, have a great day. Thanks for watching.